There are places in the universe where hope goes to die. Worlds so ancient that their names have been forgotten by every living species, remembered only by the stones and the stars. Hydrus 7 was one such place. A relic world on the edge of Covenant-controlled space, wrapped in electromagnetic storms that turned scanners blind and made orbital insertion a prayer spoken into the void. The UNSC had lost 3 recon teams trying to map its surface. The 4th team never reported back at all. Blue team didn't need prayers. They had ammunition, training, and each other. The operation was textbook until it wasn't. Fire team leader John 117 moved through the alien corridors with the kind of calm that only decades of war could forge. Behind him, Linda 058 swept sightlines with her sniper rifle, every movement economical, every breath measured. Fred 104 and Kelly 087 flanked the formation, their motion trackers painting hostile contacts in amber clusters that blinked and died as the team advanced. The 5th member, a newer Spartan-II designated, Sam 34 pulled from an alternate operational timeline where he'd survived Gamma. Station covered their 6 with a rotary cannon that hummed like a sleeping predator. The Covenant installation was a cathedral of impossible geometry. Forerunner architecture didn't bend to human logic. Walls curved into dimensions that hurt to perceive. Gravity shifted in localized pockets, making drop steps feel like freefall and climbs feel like descent. The Spartans adapted. They always adapted. When the corridors twisted, they adjusted their formation. When the gravity wells pulled, they compensated with thrusters. When the energy signatures spiked and alien glyphs began burning through the walls and scripts no translator could parse, they didn't panic. They simply moved faster. The relic sat in the heart of the structure. A sphere of liquid silver, suspended between 3 obsidian pillars, pulsing with light that existed in spectrums Mjolnir sensors couldn't classify. Covenant forces had died protecting it. Sanghaili honor guards lay scattered across the chamber floor. Their energy shields burned out from the inside. Their bodies contorted in expressions of terror that seemed wrong in a species that worshipped death in combat. Something had killed them. Not the UNSC, not each other. Something else. John approached the sphere with his weapon raised. His HUD flickered. Cortana's voice crackled through the cone, distorted by interference that shouldn't exist in a localized area. She was saying something about temporal distortions, about gravitational readings that violated 3 separate laws of physics, about how they needed to leave immediately. But the mission was retrieval. Intel suggested this relic was a navigational key to a Halo installation. You didn't leave keys lying around for the Covenant to use. Fred reached for the containment unit. The moment his gauntlet made contact, the sphere erupted. Light doesn't scream. But this light did. It tore through the chamber in a shockwave of silver fire that sent all 5 Spartans sprawling. Alarms shrieked across their HUDs. Radiation warnings. Gravitational anomalies. Spatial fractures forming in mid-air like cracks in reality's windshield. The pillars began to sink into the floor, and the floor began to sink into something beneath the floor. A darkness that wasn't absence of light, but presence of void. A hungry nothing that pulled at their armor with invisible teeth. John barked orders. Extract. Now. The team moved as one. Boots mag-locking to surfaces that were no longer solid. Thrusters firing to counteract gravity that was no longer consistent. Kelly hit the corridor first, her speed augments pushing her past the collapsing doorway. Linda followed, firing her sniper rifle back into the chamber at targets that didn't exist, suppressing a threat she couldn't see but could feel. Sand's rotary cannon roared, chewing through walls and space itself as the rift widened. The ship was 300 meters away. They covered it in 40 seconds. Pelican dropship engines screamed to life as the Spartans maglocked to the hull, and the pilot punched the thrusters without waiting for clearance. Behind them, the installation folded in on itself like a dying star. The rift spread. Space buckled. And then it reached for them. MJOLNIR systems registered the anomaly as slipspace intrusion. But Cortana's voice cut through the cum with a single word that made every Spartan's blood freeze. Negative. Not slipspace. Something older. Something mathematically impossible. The rift wasn't a doorway between points in space. It was a wound in the fabric of reality itself, and it was bleeding. The Pelican's engines exploded, not from damage from stress, from trying to move through a dimension that rejected the concept of movement. The Spartans felt it through their armor, a sensation like being stretched across infinite distance and compressed into a single point simultaneously. Their HUDs went dark. Their comms went silent. And then the light swallowed them whole. John's last coherent thought before the universe tore itself apart was a simple tactical assessment: mission failure. They'd been swallowed by something that didn't exist. They were falling through a space that had no direction. And wherever they landed, if they landed, it wouldn't be anywhere the UNSC could reach. The rift collapsed behind them. The installation vanished. And 5 Spartan E's tumbled into a screaming void where physics went to die and nightmares learned to breathe. Asterisk, there are hells in every universe. The UNSC had its own catalog of nightmares: glassed colonies, flood-infested hulks, the cold void of space where a single breach meant death in 15 seconds. Spartans trained for all of them. But no amount of training could prepare a human mind, even an augmented one, for the warp dot. The Immaterium was not a place. It was an anti-place, a realm where thought became matter and emotion, carved reality from screaming nothingness. Demons swirled through the void like schools of predatory fish, their forms shifting between beautiful and grotesque, their voices singing hymns of madness in languages that predated speech. The warp was hunger. The warp was rage. The warp was despair given teeth and wings and the desire to unmake everything that dared to exist. The Spartans fell through it like stones dropped into an ocean of fire. John's consciousness returned in fragments. His armor's environmental seals had triggered automatically, locking his suit into a protective cocoon mode designed to survive hard vacuum and radiation exposure. It wasn't designed to survive this. His HUD strobed with error messages. His vitals spiked and crashed and spiked again. His neural interface, the connection between his mind and his armor, was screaming. Feedback loops as it tried to process sensory data that violated every protocol in its database. He forced his eyes open and immediately regretted it. The warp was color without light, sound without source, distance without space. Shapes moved through the void, massive, writhing, impossible shapes that his brain tried to classify as hostile contacts, but couldn't, because they existed in too many dimensions simultaneously. Faces formed in the dark. Faces he recognized. Faces of Marines he'd failed to save. Faces of children on reach, burning. Faces of himself, twisted and screaming and begging him to just give up, to let the void take him, to stop fighting a war that would never end. John's heart rate didn't spike. His breathing didn't quicken. The augmentation saw to that. Decades of combat conditioning, psychological indoctrination, and trauma-forged discipline locked his mind into a cold, analytical state that treated hallucinations like enemy fire, present, hostile, irrelevant. He categorized the entities. He noted their patterns. He tagged them as hostile contacts and moved to the next task. Locate the team. Kelly's IFF tag blinked on his HUD, 14 meters to his left. Linda was 9 meters above him or below him. Directionality had no meaning here. Fred and Sam's signatures flickered in and out of existence, phasing like cum signals passing through interference. John triggered a short-range radio pulse. 3 clicks. Standard nonverbal check-in. 4 clicks came back. The team was alive. The team was conscious. That was enough. The demons noticed them. A thing made of eyes and blades drifted toward Linda, its form unfolding like a flower of knives. It whispered to her in a voice that sounded like her own, asking why she kept fighting, why she kept killing, whether she'd ever counted the souls she'd ended with a single shot. Linda's response was a 3-round burst from her MA5 rifle. The bullets passed through the demon without effect, but the act of resistance, the sheer stubborn refusal to engage with the horror, made it recoil. The warp fed on emotion. It fed on fear, rage, despair. It starved when confronted with cold mechanical defiance. The Spartans were very good at defiance. Fred floated near, a swirling vortex of colors that screamed promises of pleasure and oblivion. His vitals remained steady. His weapon remained raised. He classified it as area denial hazard and maneuvered around it. Sam's armor was being clawed at by a dozen skeletal hands that emerged from nowhere, trying to pry open his seals, trying to reach the flesh beneath. He activated his energy shields and let the feedback burn them away, then repositioned closer to John's coordinates. They didn't speak. Speech in the warp was dangerous. Words had power here. Intent had mass. But the Spartans had spent 30 years fighting together. They didn't need words. A shift in posture. A slight adjustment in weapon angle. A 2-degree change in drift direction. The team synchronized without language, forming a defensive sphere that rotated slowly through the madness. Each Spartan covering the other's blind spots in a dance. They'd perfected across 100 battlefields. The warp tried harder. It showed Kelly her own speed turned against her. An eternity of running and never arriving, never escaping, never stopping. It showed Fred his failures compounded across infinite timelines. Every civilian he couldn't save dying in endless loops. It showed Sam his original death, over and over, the cold of space and the loneliness of sacrifice. It showed John a throne of bones and a future where humanity worshipped him as a god of war while he screamed, inside a prison of his own legend. Their heart rates didn't spike. Their breathing didn't quicken. They observed, categorized, ignored. Time was meaningless in the Immaterium. They could have been falling for seconds or centuries. But eventually, the madness began to thin. The demons grew distant. The colors bled away into darkness, and the darkness became something almost peaceful, a void that didn't hunger, but simply waited. And then, without warning, without ceremony, reality tore open like a wound, and gravity reasserted itself with the weight of a hammer. The Spartans crashed through the rift and into real space. Alarms screamed. Their armor registered impacts, radiation, debris. They were tumbling through a debris field near a massive spatial structure, a warp gate of some kind, titanic and ancient, surrounded by shattered ships and screaming energy fields. John's last glimpse before unconsciousness claimed him was of a distant planet, half wrapped in darkness, and a sky filled with more warships than he'd seen in the entire human covenant war. Then the world went black, and the Spartans drifted, silent and still, toward whatever came next. The Cadian Gate was the Imperium's locked door against the longest night. For 10,000 years, the fortress world of Cadia had stood watch over the Eye of Terror, that bleeding wound in reality where chaos itself spilled into the material realm. The void around Cadia was a graveyard of ships, a museum of 10 millennia of war, where every patrol route passed through fields of ancient wreckage and every auger sweep detected ghosts. Anomalies were common. Threats were constant. But this signal was different. Mago's explorer Zenith 9 had served aboard the Imperial Navy frigate Undying Resolve for 63 years. His biological components had long since withered to vestigial decoration. His consciousness existed primarily within the ship's cogitator network, his thoughts threaded through data streams and sensor arrays. He'd seen 1,000 anomalies. He'd cataloged warp spawn, Xenos infiltrators, and spatial phenomena that defied explanation. But he'd never seen anything like this. The signal was clean. Too clean. It possessed no warp taint, no psychic resonance, no demonic corruption. It broadcasted in electromagnetic frequencies that followed mathematical principles the Mechanicus recognized but hadn't used in 8,000 years. The energy signatures were coherent, organized, efficient in ways that violated the Imperium's fundamental understanding of technology as holy relic rather than engineered tool. And most disturbing of all, it responded to scanning attempts with counterscans of equal sophistication. The objects themselves drifted in a cluster, locked together by magnetic clamps. 5 armored figures, human-sized, surrounded by debris that registered as a destroyed aircraft of unknown classification. Their armor was seamless, integrated, void-sealed. It incorporated materials the Magos' database couldn't identify: ceramic composites, energy shielding that wasn't void shields, power systems that weren't plasma drives. They looked like Adeptus Astartes in the same way a lasgun looked like a toaster, superficially similar, fundamentally different. Captain Octavia Renin stood on the frigate's bridge, her augmetic eye whirring as it magnified the objects on the view screen. She was third-generation Cadian Guard, promoted to naval command after Cadia's fall, a survivor of the 13th Black Crusade who'd watched her homeworld crack in half and refused to let that break her. She'd learned to trust her instincts. And her instincts were screaming that these things, whatever they were, represented a threat she couldn't classify. Magos, assessment. Zenith 9's voice crackled from the Vox speakers, layered with binary cant and mechanical harmonics. Genetically human, but altered. I detect surgical augmentations beyond Astartes' tolerances. Skeletal reinforcement using materials not present in the imperial catalogs of blessed metallurgy. Musculature density inconsistent with natural development or standard genoforging techniques. Neural architecture suggesting cybernetic integration, but without visible implants. Captain, these organisms are anomalies wrapped in blasphemy. Are they alive? Affirmative. Vital signs present. Life support active within their armor. They are unconscious, but recovering. Octavia made her decision in 3 seconds. Retrieve them. Full containment protocols. I want them in isolation cells, armor intact until the adepts can safely remove it. And transmit a priority astropathic message to Segmentum Command. Classification. Xenos infiltration, possible. The Undying resolves recovery servitors deployed. Mindless cyborg slaves who grappled the armored figures into cargo nets and hauled them into the frigate's hold. The Spartans didn't wait during transport. They didn't resist. They simply drifted, their armor's emergency power reserves keeping them alive in the cold void. Their unconscious minds still processing the warp's echoes in dreams that would never fully fade. When John 117 finally opened his eyes, he was in a cell, not a brig, not a holding area. A cell. The walls were 3-meter-thick ceramite, reinforced with prayer scrolls and purity seals. The door was a blast door designed to contain Astartes-level threats. Servitor-mounted weapons tracked his movements from the ceiling primitive ballistic cannons and flamers, but enough volume of fire to threaten even Mjolnir armor. His team was nowhere in sight, but his armor's passive sensors detected 4 other similar containment cells within 30 meters. IFF tags blinked on his HUD. Green, green, green. The team was alive. That was step 1. Step 2 was assessment. His armor's reactor was functional. Shields at 60%. Ammunition reserves low, but sufficient. No external communications. The walls were too thick, or the ship's architecture blocked standard UNSC frequencies. The air was breathable, but tasted of oil, incense, and something organic that made his skin crawl. Gravity was 0.98 standard, slightly heavy. Temperature was cold enough to see his breath despite his armor's environmental controls. He was a prisoner on an unknown vessel in unknown space with unknown hostiles. He'd been in worse situations. Not many, but some. The door opened with a hiss of pneumatic locks. 6 figures entered. 2 were human merely. They wore robes covered in wax seals and carried data slates that flickered with green text. Their eyes were replaced with clicking augmetic sensors. Their hands were mechanical claws. Behind them came 4 soldiers in armor that looked like a medieval knight had collided with a tank, carrying weapons that were half gun, half religious icon. They moved with the stiffness of poorly trained conscripts, fearful and trigger-happy. The lead robed figure stepped forward, its Vox speaker crackling. You will identify yourself. Anomaly. Origin. Purpose. Allegiance. John stood slowly, hands visible, weapon holstered. Compliance until threat assessment was complete. Spartan 117, United Nations Space Command. We were engaged in combat operations against hostile forces when we encountered a spatial anomaly. We require information on our current location and communication access to re-establish contact with our command structure. Silence. The robed figures exchanged glances, or what passed for glances when your eyes were sensor arrays. One of them tapped its data slate, muttering in a language John's translator couldn't parse. Binary code, maybe. Or prayers. Hard to tell. The lead figure spoke again. You claim human origin, yet your genetic structure is aberrant. Your technology is aberrant. Your refusal to offer prayer to the God Emperor is aberrant. You will submit to biological sampling, technological audit, and psychic evaluation. Resistance will be interpreted as hostility. Hostility will be met with termination. John's expression didn't change, but behind his visor, his mind was racing. These people spoke a variant of English, corrupted by thousands of years of linguistic drift. They treated technology like religion. They referenced an emperor with divine authority. And they'd scanned his genetics thoroughly enough to detect Spartan augmentations. He'd just made first contact with a human civilization, and they'd immediately decided he was a threat. Kelly's voice crackled over the team's encrypted channel, barely a whisper. "Chief, I count 18 hostiles on this deck. Primitive ballistics, but massed fire could overwhelm shields. Recommend we wait for better intel before engaging." Fred's voice followed. "Agreed. We're on a ship. Unknown size. Unknown crew complement. Unknown capabilities. We go loud, we risk losing control of the situation." John kept his eyes on the robed figures. "Stand by. Comply with non-invasive requests. Resist anything that compromises armor integrity or operational security. If they try to separate us, we extract." The interrogation continued for 6 hours. They asked questions John couldn't answer without revealing technologies these people clearly didn't possess. They demanded religious oaths he wouldn't give. They tried to remove his helmet and recoiled when the armor's biometric locks shocked their tools. Eventually, they left, frustrated and terrified, muttering about inquisitorial intervention and Zeno's corruption. John sat in the cell and waited. The team was together. They had their armor. They had time. And somewhere in this strange, dark future, there was a way home. They just had to survive long enough to find it. When the Inquisition moves, entire worlds hold their breath. It is the Emperor's secret hand, the hidden blade that cuts away corruption before it spreads, the organization that answers to no authority, save the divine will of a corpse on a golden throne. Inquisitors are judges, executioners, and investigators empowered to condemn or save billions with a single word. An Inquisitor Covenant Shrael had just been handed the most fascinating case of his career. Shrael was Ordo Xenos, specializing in alien infiltration and non-human threats to Imperial space. He'd burned Genestealer cults on agri-worlds, purged Eldar collaborators from rogue trader fleets, and personally executed a planetary governor who'd made a pact with the Tau for technological aid. He was Puritan in philosophy. He believed in the Emperor's will as absolute, in humanity's purity as sacred, in any deviation as corruption demanding fire. And these ... anomalies were deviations incarnate. He stood in the observation chamber above the Spartans' containment cells, his servo skull hovering beside him, recording everything. 5 armored figures. Humanoid. Genetically baseline human, but altered in ways that made Astartes' genoforging look crude. Their augmentations were surgical, precise, integrated at the cellular level. No signs of chaos corruption. No warp taint. No psychic presence whatsoever. They registered on psychic scans as blanks, voids, as if they simply didn't exist in the Immaterium's reflection of reality. That should have been reassuring. It wasn't. Things that didn't exist in the warp were either blessed or cursed. And Shrael had learned to assume the latter. "Begin genetic audit," he commanded. The tech priests deployed sample drones' tiny servitor, constructs armed with needle probes designed to pierce armor joints. The first drone approached Blue Team leader's cell. It extended its probe toward a seal in the armor's underarm section. The armor reacted. An electric pulse, precise and localized, fried the drone's circuitry. The servitor fell, smoking. Shrael's augmetic eye narrowed. Fascinating. The armor possesses autonomous defensive protocols. Try the female specimen. Lindio 5-8 didn't move when the drone approached. She simply tilted her head slightly, tracking its movement with the stillness of a predator, deciding whether prey was worth the effort. The drone's probe touched her armor. The armor didn't shock it. It simply refused to yield. The needle bent. The probe broke. The drone retreated, whining mechanical confusion. One of the tech priests turned to Shrael, its Vox unit clicking with agitation. "Inquisitor, the materials resist all standard penetration methods. We could employ meltacutters, but that risks killing the subjects. Then employ non-invasive scans. I want genetic profiles built from cellular residue in the debris we recovered. I want their armor's power signatures analyzed. And I want a full psychic evaluation. The psyker they brought in was young, barely past his sanctioning trials, still terrified of his own gifts. He stood outside John's cell, trembling, his third eye tattoo weeping blood as he extended his consciousness toward the armored figure. For 10 seconds, he was silent. Then he screamed, "Nothing. There's nothing." I reach, and there's only void, only emptiness, only... He collapsed, convulsing, and the Medicae servitors dragged him away. Shrael watched the Spartans through the observation glass. They hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. They simply stood or sat in their cells with the patience of statues, waiting. That patience disturbed him more than violence would have. Xenos raged. Heretics raved. Demons tempted. But these things simply waited, silent and calm, as if they'd already calculated every possible outcome and decided. Cooperation was tactically optimal until it wasn't. The genetic reports arrived via data slate. Shrael read them twice, certain there'd been an error. Human baseline genome, but augmented with precision gene therapy that enhanced bone density, muscle fiber efficiency, neural processing speed, clotting factors, reflexes. No obvious signs of chaos corruption. No mutations. No warp taint. Just ... improvements. Calculated, scientific, replicable improvements. The Imperium had technology like this once. 10,000 years ago, before the dark age of technology, before the age of strife, before the Emperor rose to unite humanity from the ashes. Tech priests whispered about STC templates that could forge super soldiers without the Astartes' brutal process, without the warp-touched gene seed, without the ritual and faith. Those templates were lost, destroyed, forbidden, and yet here were 5 humans who looked like someone had found one. Shrael made his decision. He voxed the ship's captain. "I'm authorizing escalated containment. These specimens represent either Xenos infiltration or rediscovered Dark Age technology. Either option demands immediate isolation from Imperial personnel and full quarantine until I can determine their nature. Prepare for potential termination protocols." Captain Octavia's voice crackled back, tight with frustration. "Inquisitor, with respect, these entities saved my crew during the last warp surge. They responded to threats with tactical precision. They didn't attempt escape. They've cooperated within reasonable parameters. Captain, cooperation is the first tactic of infiltrators. I will not risk this vessel, this system, or the Imperium itself because they've been polite prisoners. Initiate lockdown. I want weapons trained on every cell. If they move without clearance, you will fire until nothing remains but ash." Shrael cut the vox and returned his gaze to the Spartans. They were watching him now. All 5 of them, in their separate cells, had turned to face the observation window, a window they shouldn't have been able to see through from their angle. Their helmets were featureless. But Shrael felt their eyes on him anyway. He'd spent 40 years hunting aliens who wore human skin. He'd learned to recognize the predators hiding behind familiar faces. And these 5, they were predators. Not corrupt, not evil, but absolutely, undeniably dangerous in ways the Imperium had forgotten how to understand. The question was simple. Were they a weapon to be wielded or a threat to be destroyed? Shrael suspected he'd have to decide soon, because in the shadows of the ship's lower decks, something else had noticed the Spartans. Something that had followed them through the warp. Something that hungered for what they represented. Chaos was coming, and it wanted them back. Asterisk, the warp does not forget. It catalogs every soul that passes through its screaming depths, carving their essence into its infinite memory like names scratched into bone. The Spartans had endured the Immaterium's attention for mere moments, but moments in the warp could echo for eternity. And something on the other side had taken notice. Something ancient. Something patient. Something that saw these 5 uncorrupted warriors as challenges, trophies, or perhaps ... converts. The undying resolve shuddered. Not from engine strain or weapons fire, but from something deeper a vibration in the ship's skeleton that made servitors. Twitch and tech priests mutter prayers to the Omnissiah. Geller field integrity dropped 2%. Then 4. Then 8. The ship's navigator, a mutant blessed and cursed with a third eye that perceived the warp's tides, screamed a warning through the Vox. Breach! Warp breach on decks 7 through 9. They're coming through. Reality tore. Demons poured into the ship like an infection, flooding corridors with impossible flesh and warp fire. But they weren't alone. Behind them came the traitor Astartes word-bearers, clad in crimson armor, inscribed with blasphemous scripture, chanting hymns that made the air bleed. They'd followed the Spartans' scent through the Immaterium, curious about souls that could resist corruption, eager to test whether discipline could withstand true faith. The Imperial crew responded with the courage of the doomed. Armsmen fired lasguns into the tide, their beams cutting down lesser demons before greater ones tore them apart. Naval officers shouted orders, even as warp spawn pulled them screaming into the walls. Servitors fought until their programming shattered, and they became puppets for the demonic. Their mechanized limbs turned against their creator's dot in the containment level. Alarms shrieked. Inquisitor Shrail's voice cut through the Vox, cold and decisive. All units, fall back to defensible positions. Seal bulkheads. Initiate purge protocols on compromised decks. He turned to the tech priest manning the containment controls. Flood the anomaly's cells with plasma. Now. Captain Octavia's voice roared back. Inquisitor, belay that order. We need every weapon we have, and those prisoners have proven combat capable. They are uncontrolled variables in a chaos incursion. I will not risk, asterisk. The decision was taken from both of them. In his cell, John 117 heard the alarms, felt the ship's vibrations, and accessed his armor's external sensors. Energy signatures consistent with weapons fire. Unknown biological contacts moving through the vessel in patterns that matched. Hive swarm tactics. Screaming. A lot of screaming. Blue team sound off. 4 acknowledgements. All green. We have a hostile breach situation. Unknown force composition. Recommendation. Break containment, secure equipment, assess threat, provide support to defending forces. Fred's voice was dry. The defending forces locked us in cells and threatened to dissect us. Irrelevant. They're human. They're under attack. We respond. Kelly's sigh was audible. Can't take you anywhere, Chief. The cells were designed to hold Astartes. They were not designed to hold 5 Spartans working in concert. Linda used her armor's energy shield to create a localized in-me pulse that fried the locking mechanism on her door. She slipped into the corridor, moving to the central control panel, her hands flying across the interface with the speed of someone who'd hacked Covenant systems under fire. The remaining cell doors hissed open simultaneously. Blue team retrieved their weapons from the evidence locker in 45 seconds. Ma-5 rifles, Magnum sidearms, grenades, combat knives. The equipment was intact. The Imperials had been too terrified to tamper with it. John checked his ammo counter. 60 rounds. Not ideal, but workable. Linda, high ground. Fred, Kelly, flanking formation. Sam, suppression. We moved to contact, non-lethal protocols on defending forces, unless fired upon. Threat priority, unknown hostiles. They moved through the corridors like ghosts, their boots making no sound despite the armor's weight. Their weapons raised but fingers off triggers, their formation fluid and precise. The ship's architecture was labyrinthine Gothic arches, prayer scroll banners, cogitator banks that looked like religious altars. They navigated by sound, by tactical sense, by following the screams toward the fighting. They reached Deck 8 and found hell. The corridor was a slaughter. Imperial armsmen lay torn apart, their bodies twisted into shapes that violated anatomy. Demons fed on the corpses, things made of too many limbs and too many mouths, their forms flickering between dimensions. And walking through the carnage, calm as priests in a temple, came the word-bearers. 8-foot-tall demigods in crimson power armor, carrying bolt weapons that fired explosive rounds, chanting in a language that hurt to hear. One of them saw the Spartans. It tilted its helmeted head, curious. Ah, the little anomalies. We felt you in the sea of souls. You resisted beautifully. Come, kneel before the gods that hunger, and we will show you truths your primitive Imperium has hidden. John's response was 3 rounds center mass. The bolt shells struck the word-bearer's chest plate and ricocheted, doing minimal damage but making a point. Blue team, weapons free. The corridor erupted. 5 Spartans unleashed coordinated fire on targets that shouldn't exist, treating demons like hostile wildlife and traitor marines like armored infantry. Linda's sniper rounds found joints in the word-bearer's armor, exploiting weak points with surgical precision. Kelly moved at speeds that made her a blur, flanking the enemy, her combat knife finding the gap between a traitor marine's helmet and gorget, her blade punching through ceramite with augmented strength. Sam's rotary cannon chewed through a cluster of lesser demons, the volume of fire disrupting their corporeal forms faster than they could regenerate. Fred and John worked as a pair, grenades and bullets creating overlapping fields of fire. A word-bearer charged John, its chainsword roaring. John sidestepped, used the traitor marine's momentum against it, and delivered a mag-boot kick to its knee joint that shattered the armor seal. The word-bearer stumbled. John put 3 rounds through the exposed joint, then moved to the next target without confirming the kill. The Imperials who witnessed the fight would later describe it as holy, as divine, as the Emperor's angels made manifest. But in truth, it was simply math. 5 hyper-lethal operators with 30 years of synchronized combat experience, fighting an enemy they'd never seen before with the same cold efficiency they'd shown against the Covenant. The Flood, and every nightmare the galaxy had thrown at them. The word-bearers retreated, chanting hymns of admiration, even as they fell back through the warp breach. The demons dissolved, their anchors to reality severed, and the Spartans stood in the corridor, weapons raised, surrounded by carnage and awestruck Imperial survivors who whispered prayers and made the sign of the Aquila. Captain Octavia arrived with a security detachment, her bolt pistol drawn, her expression caught between relief and terror. She stared at the Spartans, at the bodies, at the impossible. Who are you? John lowered his weapon, but didn't holster it. We're soldiers. You were under attack. We responded. You killed traitor Astartes. With small arms. In under 2 minutes. Yes, ma'am. Octavia looked at Inquisitor Shrael, who'd arrived behind her, his face unreadable. The Inquisitor stared at the Spartans for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice quiet. I want them rearmed. I want them briefed on our strategic situation. And I want them ready for deployment. Whatever they are. We need them. Shrael turned and walked away, his mind already racing. He'd wanted to know if they were weapons or threats. He had his answer. They were both, and the Imperium was about to learn what 5 Spartans could do in a galaxy that had forgotten what real soldiers looked like. The Adeptus Astartes do not ask permission to intervene. They are the Emperor's chosen warriors, gene-forged demigods who operate outside the normal chains of command, answerable only to their chapter masters and the High Lords of Terra. When the Undying Resolve transmitted its distress signal word-bearer's incursion. Containment breached, unknown hostiles engaged, the nearest Space Marine strike cruiser altered course immediately. The ship bore the colors of the Crimson Fists, a chapter known for discipline, tactical brilliance, and absolute loyalty to the IMPER-IUM. Captain Alessio Cortez commanded the Rapid Response Force. He was a veteran of 2 centuries, a warrior who'd fought orcs, Eldar, and the forces of chaos across a dozen war zones. He'd seen Xenos constructs that mimicked human form, demonic infiltrators who wore skin-like disguises, and renegades who twisted Astartes' genoforging into abominations. He'd learned to trust nothing that seemed too good to be true, and the reports from the Undying Resolve seemed far too good to be true. The Thunderhawk gunship docked hard, magnetic clamps slamming into the frigate's hull with the force of a meteor strike. Cortez led his squad into the Ship 10 Astartes, in power armor the color of blood and stone, bolt weapons ready, every sensor scanning for threats. They moved through corridors still stained with demon ichor, past Imperial crewmen who flinched and made the sign of the Aquila, toward the containment level where the anomalies waited. Cortez had reviewed the combat footage. 5 human-sized figures engaging word-bearers with primitive kinetic weapons and succeeding. Moving with coordination that rivaled Astartes' kill teams. Displaying augmented strength and speed without the bulk of power armor. He'd come to one of 3 conclusions. Xenos infiltrators wearing human disguises, renegade tech priests experimenting with Forbidden's augmentation, or something the Imperium had lost and shouldn't have found. He entered the briefing chamber and saw them. 5 figures in armor that looked almost crude compared to Astartes' warplate. No ceramite, no sacred seals. Just smooth, angular plating in colors of green and gold, functional and efficient, designed by engineers who cared about performance over pageantry. They stood at ease, weapons holstered, helmets on, visors reflecting the chamber's dim lighting. They didn't kneel. They didn't salute. They simply acknowledged the Astartes with the calm recognition of professionals. Meeting peers, Cortez stopped 3 meters away. At 8 feet tall in his power armor, he towered over them. His squad fanned out behind him, bolters lowered but ready. He spoke through his helmet's vox grill, his voice a rumble. "I am Captain Alessio Cortez of the Crimson Fist's 4th Company. Identify yourselves, origin, purpose, allegiance." The lead figure, the one the crew had designated Blue Leader, responded without hesitation. Spartan 117, UNSC Naval Special Warfare Command. We are displaced military personnel from an alternate reality or timeline. We have no hostile intent toward your Imperium. We engaged the Chaos Forces because they represented an immediate threat to non-combatants. Cortez processed the statement. Alternate reality. Displaced. UNSC, an acronym his database didn't recognize. He gestured to his tech marine. "Scan them." The tech marine stepped forward, auspex humming. After 30 seconds, he reported. Gene signature. Baseline human with extensive surgical augmentation. No gene seed markers. No warp taint. Technology unknown, but non-heretical in design philosophy. Captain, these are not Astartes. But they are not Xenos constructs either. Then what are they? I do not know. Cortez made a decision. You will accompany us to the strike cruiser for further evaluation. You will submit to genetic testing, technological audit, and psychic screening. You will answer all questions regarding your capabilities and origins. Refusal will be interpreted as hostility. Compliance? John tilted his head slightly. We'll cooperate within reasonable operational security parameters. We won't surrender technologies or information that could compromise our defensive capabilities or strategic position. Acceptable? Cortez almost smiled. Almost. The anomaly was negotiating. Not begging. Not threatening. Negotiating, as if it had leverage. He respected that. You have no leverage, anomaly. You are 5. We are 10. This ship carries 100 Astartes. You are surrounded, outgunned, and operating in a universe you do not understand. Kelly's voice crackled through the Spartans' external speakers, light and almost amused. With respect, Captain, we were surrounded and outgunned every day for 30 years. It's kind of our default state. Cortez's squad tensed. One of them, a young assault marine, raised his bolt pistol. You dare mock the Astartes? Fred's response was calm. Not mocking. Stating fact. We're not your enemies. We prefer to be allies. But we've survived worse than being outnumbered. Tension coiled through the chamber. Astartes and Spartans faced each other across 3 meters of empty space. 2 groups of super soldiers from different universes, each convinced of their superiority, neither willing to back down. Cortez's finger drifted toward his bolter's trigger. John's hand shifted fractionally closer to his sidearm dot, and then the alarm screamed again. Chaos forces, second wave, hitting the ship's starboard hangar bay. Cortez cursed in high Gothic. His vox crackled with reports. Traitor Marines, demon engines breaching pods. The word-bearers hadn't retreated. They'd regrouped. And now they were coming in force, seeking to finish what they'd started. John spoke quietly. You can arrest us, or you can use us. Your call. Cortez made the call in 2 seconds. You fight beside us. You follow Astartes' tactical command. You engage Chaos forces only. If you turn on Imperial forces, we will kill you. Understood? Understood. The two groups moved as one. Astartes and Spartans running through the corridors toward the sound of gunfire, toward the screams and the explosions, toward a battle that would decide whether they were enemies or allies. Cortez watched the Spartans move fluid, silent, perfectly synchronized, and felt something he rarely experienced: uncertainty. These warriors were not Astartes, but they moved like they were, fought like they were, thought like they were. And that disturbed him more than any Xenos threat, because if humanity could create warriors like this without the Emperor's gene seed, without the rituals and faith and suffering, what did that say about the Astartes themselves? He pushed the thought aside. The battle was coming. Philosophy could wait. They hit the hangar bay together, 20 warriors against a tide of chaos. And the universe watched two mythologies collide in fire and blood. There are moments when the Imperium devours its own children. It happens quietly, without fanfare, in interrogation cells and execution chambers, far from public eyes. It happens when the Inquisition decides that a threat, real or perceived, outweighs any potential value. And it happens most often to those who refuse to kneel, who question, who represent something outside the rigid doctrines that keep humanity's rotting empire from collapsing entirely. Inquisitor Schrael watched the battle recordings for the third time. The Spartans fighting beside the Crimson Fists, coordinating with Astartes squads like they trained together for decades, moving through kill zones with inhuman precision, engaging traitor marines at close range and surviving. There was no denying their effectiveness, no denying their value as weapons, but value as weapons made them dangerous. Schrael's philosophy was absolute. The Imperium survived through purity, through rigid adherence to doctrine, through the elimination of anything that deviated from the Emperor's vision. These Spartans were human in genetics, but alien in thought. They refused to worship the Emperor. They refused to accept imperial authority without question. They possessed technologies that could destabilize the Mechanicus' monopoly, augmentations that could render Astartes obsolete, philosophies that suggested humanity could thrive without faith. They were a virus, a seductive, effective, brilliant virus that would infect the Imperium's foundations if allowed to spread. He convened a council in the undying resolve stratagem. Captain Octavia, Captain Cortez, 3 senior tech priests, 2 astropaths, all sworn to secrecy, all bound by oaths that made betrayal impossible. Schrael addressed them with cold clarity. The anomalies cannot be allowed to remain within Imperial space. They represent technologies the Imperium deliberately abandoned after the Age of Strife. They represent philosophies that reject the ecclesiarchy's teachings. They inspire questions in those who witness them, questions about whether faith is necessary, whether the Astartes are truly the pinnacle of human warfare, whether the Emperor's methods are the only path to survival. Captain Octavia slammed her fist on the table. They saved the ship twice. They fought chaos without hesitation. They've cooperated within every reasonable parameter. You're condemning them for heresy they don't even understand. I'm condemning them for what they represent: hope without faith, strength without sacrifice, humanity that doesn't need the Emperor. Schrael's augmetic eye focused on Cortez. Captain, your assessment. Can Astartes contain them if they resist? Cortez was silent for a long moment. They are not Astartes, but they fight like Astartes, who've trained together for a century. 5 of them held a corridor against word-bearers that would have required 2 full squads of my brothers. If they go hostile, we will prevail, but casualties will be significant, acceptable. I'm issuing an inquisitorial mandate. The Spartans are to be terminated, cleanly, if possible, by force, if necessary. No survivors, no remains for study, plasma cremation and void dispersal. This incident will be sealed under my authority. Tech Priest Zenith 9's clicking voice interrupted. Inquisitor, with respect, their technology represents knowledge, potentially recoverable from the Dark Age. To destroy them is to destroy irreplaceable data. Their technology is irrelevant compared to the philosophical contagion they carry. The decision is made. Captain Cortez stood slowly. He was a space marine, sworn to defend the Imperium above all else. But he was also a warrior who recognized honor when he saw it. Inquisitor, I will not order my men to execute beings who fought beside us against chaos, who shed blood to protect Imperial citizens, who have committed no crime save being different. Shrael's voice dropped to freezing calm. Captain, are you refusing an inquisitorial directive? I am stating that such an order violates the Codex Astartes and my chapter's honor. Find another enforcer. The room erupted. Octavia sided with Cortez. The tech priests wavered. The astropaths remained silent, terrified of offending either authority. Shrael realized with cold fury that his mandate would not be followed willingly. So he made the call that would haunt him forever. He activated his rosette, the symbol of inquisitorial authority, and transmitted orders directly to the ship's armsmen and secondary Astartes units. All forces. The Spartans are declared extremist-level threats. Terminate on sight. Non-compliance with this order is heresy. The Spartans knew immediately. Their armor's passive sensors detected a shift in the ship's crew patterns. Weapons being distributed. Squads moving toward their position. The sudden absence of friendly IFF tags and the presence of targeting locks. John's voice was calm over Blue Team's channel. We're about to be engaged by Imperial forces. Non-lethal protocols. We disable, disarm, and extract. No kills on loyalist humans unless absolutely necessary. Clear? 4 acknowledgements. Kelly, map escape routes. Linda, overwatch. Fred, breach charges. Sam, suppression. We're taking a ship and getting out of this war zone. The first armsman squad that tried to arrest them never got their weapons raised. Kelly moved through them like water, her strikes precise and brutal, broken wrists, shattered knees, unconscious bodies. Linda held the corridor with her sniper rifle, non-lethal shots that destroyed weapons and targeting systems without killing. Sam's rotary cannon roared over the heads of charging soldiers, the noise and muzzle flash alone enough to send them diving for cover. Asterisk. Fred placed breaching charges on the bulkhead doors, creating new routes, forcing the Imperials to split their forces. John moved point, his shield absorbing bolter rounds, his return fire disabling weapons and punching through cover without aiming for center mass. They fought their way through 3 decks, leaving a trail of unconscious soldiers and disabled defenses. They didn't kill. Not one. Even when the Astartes came, Cortez's brothers, who'd been ordered to terminate the threat, the Spartans, fought with restraint, armor locking to absorb blows, using EMP grenades to disable warplate, targeting joints and seals in weapon systems. It was beautiful and horrifying. 5 humans fighting demigods and refusing to kill them. Captain Cortez arrived in the hangar. Bay to find half his company disabled, his brothers struggling to stand, their armor systems rebooting. The Spartans stood at the center of the carnage, surrounded by unconscious bodies, weapons raised, but fingers off triggers. Waiting, Cortez approached slowly, his bolter lowered. You could have killed us. John nodded. Yes. Why didn't you? Because you're not the enemy. You're scared, misled, trapped in a system that demands you destroy what you don't understand. We've been there. We won't kill you for it. Cortez stared at the Spartan for a long moment. Then he made a decision that would see him censured by his chapter, investigated by the Inquisition, and remembered as either a traitor or a hero. He turned to his brothers. Stand down. Let them go. His squad didn't move. Captain, they saved Imperial lives. They fought chaos. They showed mercy when they had every reason to kill us. The Inquisition is wrong. Stand down. Slowly, reluctantly, the Astartes lowered their weapons. Shrael's voice screamed through the vox, demanding compliance, threatening execution. Cortez ripped the vox bead from his helmet and crushed it. The Spartans moved to the captured shuttle. John paused at the boarding ramp, looking back at Cortez. Thank you. Don't thank me. Survive. Prove the Inquisition wrong. Show this galaxy that humanity can be better than what we've become. The shuttle launched into the void, carrying 5 Spartans into a galaxy that didn't know what to do with them. Behind them, the undying resolve descended into chaos inquisitorial agents demanding arrests. Astartes refusing orders, crew members choosing sides. The Imperium had just learned a terrible truth. Even its super soldiers could be inspired to question. And that terrified the powers that ruled it more than any demon ever could. Space is patient. It waits while empires rise and fall, while civilizations burn and rebuild, while ideologies clash and shatter. The void between the undying resolve. And the Akkadian Gate's outer defense stations was cold, empty, and utterly indifferent to the drama unfolding within human ships. But space was about to become crowded. The Spartans' stolen shuttle had barely cleared the frigate's flight range when the warp tore open again. This time, the breach was massive, a wound in reality kilometers wide, vomiting forth a chaos armada. Warships that looked like cathedrals made of bone and screaming metal. Demon engines the size of tanks, clawing through the void on wings of warp fire. And at the center of it all, a word-bearer's battle barge, its hull inscribed with scripture that burned to look upon, its weapons already charging. They'd come for the Spartans, not just to kill them, to claim them, to prove that discipline could be broken, that even the uncorrupted could be made to kneel before the gods of chaos. The Imperial Navy responded with desperate fury. Defense stations opened fire, their macro cannons hurling ordnance the size of buildings. Interceptors launched, wings of fighters engaging demon-possessed attack craft in dogfights that violated physics. The undying resolve came about, its weapons hot, Captain Octavia screaming orders through the Vox as her crew fought to protect the very anomalies the Inquisition had ordered killed. And in the middle of it all, the Spartans' shuttle burned toward the nearest hangar gate, a massive void dock facility that connected to the Akkadian defense network. If they could reach it, they could disappear into the station's labyrinthine interior, evade Imperial pursuit, and buy time to find a way home. If they could reach it, John piloted the shuttle with Sam calling out fire vectors and Kelly manually overriding the damaged maneuvering thrusters. Behind them, two things gave chase: inquisitorial gunships authorized to destroy them on sight, and chaos interceptors eager to drag them back into the warp. They were caught between two armies that wanted them for opposite reasons. Fred armed the shuttle's defensive turrets, primitive by UNSC standards, but functional. We've got Imperial fighters closing from port, chaos attack craft from starboard. This bird won't last 30 seconds in a crossfire. Then we don't give them 30 seconds. John threw the shuttle into a spiraling dive, using a debris field as cover, threading between wrecked ships and exploding munitions. Kelly rerouted power from life support to engines. Linda calculated firing solutions, her sniper rifle somehow still in her hands despite the chaos, as if she could shoot fighters from inside a tumbling shuttle. She probably could. The inquisitorial gunships opened fire first. Loss beams and missile locks. The shuttle's shields flared, ablative plates boiling away. Sam returned fire, the turrets spitting rounds that punched through one interceptor's engine block and sent it spinning into the void. The chaos fighters followed, spewing warp fire and demon screams. John corkscrewed through the barrage, his reflexes and augmented processing speed turning impossible maneuvers into survival. They crossed into the hangar gate's approach vector. The massive doors were sealed emergency lockdown protocols, trapping them outside. Kelly was already hacking the access codes, her fingers dancing across the shuttle's half-broken cogitator interface, bypassing security layers that would take Imperial tech priests hours. She cracked it in 90 seconds. The doors began to open. Too slowly. Behind them, the word-bearer's battle barge fired a broadside. Not at the shuttle, at the hangar gate itself. The Chaos forces didn't want the Spartans to escape. If they couldn't claim them, they'd bury them in fire and metal. The broadside struck the station. Explosions rippled across its hull. The hangar doors shuddered, their mechanisms damaged, grinding to a halt at 30% open. Not enough clearance. The shuttle wouldn't fit. John made the call. We're going in on foot. Everyone out. Now. They didn't question. The shuttle's hatch blew, and 5 Spartans leapt into the void, mag boots locking to the station's exterior hull. Behind them, their shuttle exploded, caught in the crossfire between Imperial and Chaos forces. They ran. Across the station's surface, leaping gaps, dodging lost fire, moving toward the partially open hangar doors as explosions bloomed around them. Chaos forces landed on the hull behind them. Word-bearers in crimson warplate, their jump packs firing, their weapons roaring hymns. Demons manifested from warp rifts, things made of claws and rage. The Spartans turned and fired, their weapons. Spitting rounds into the void, each shot calculated, each kill essential. And then the Astartes arrived. Cortez's strike cruiser had followed the Spartans, ignoring inquisitorial orders, driven by something the captain himself didn't fully understand. Honor, maybe. Or the belief that these anomalies represented something worth protecting. His Thunderhawks deployed, Space Marines in crimson armor leaping into the void battle, their bolters roaring, their chainswords screaming. Three-way warfare erupted on the station's hull. Spartans fighting toward the hangar. Chaos forces trying to stop them. Astartes engaging chaos to protect the Spartans from both threats. It was madness. It was beautiful. It was the kind of fight that would be told in stories for centuries. If anyone survived to tell it. Linda found high ground on a destroyed antenna. A Ray, her sniper rifle, punching through Trader Marine. Helms with shots that shouldn't have been possible in zero gravity with moving targets. Kelly moved through the melee like a knife through water, her speed turning her into a ghost, her combat knife finding weak points in power armor. Sam's rotary cannon held a corridor, the sheer volume of fire, creating a wall that even demons couldn't cross. Fred and John worked as a pair. Grenades and coordinated fire creating kill zones that forced the enemy to choose between cover and death. Captain Cortez fought beside them, his power fist crushing a word-bearer's helmet, his bolter firing in controlled bursts. He didn't understand why he was doing this. Didn't understand why he was risking his chapter's honor, his brothers' lives, his own soul. But when he looked at the Spartans, at their discipline, their refusal to yield, their insane loyalty to each other, he saw something the Imperium had lost. Something worth dying for. The hangar doors finally ground fully open. The Spartans fought their way inside, Cortez and his brothers covering their retreat. As the last Astartes crossed the threshold, the station's tech priests sealed the entrance, trapping the chaos forces outside, buying precious minutes. Inside, the hangar was chaos. Inquisitorial agents screaming orders. Station security unsure who to shoot. Terrified civilians fleeing toward evacuation transports. The Spartans moved through the crowds, weapons holstered, trying to avoid more bloodshed, trying to find a way out that didn't involve killing innocents. An inquisitorial enforcer stepped into their path. Flanked by 20 armsmen, his voice amplified by voxcasters. Halt! By order of the Holy Inquisition, you are condemned, as John didn't let him finish. He walked forward, unarmed, hands visible, and spoke quietly. We don't want to hurt anyone. We just want to leave. Stand aside. The enforcer raised his bolt pistol. You have no authority here. Anomaly. No, but I have mercy. More than you're showing your own people by starting a firefight in a civilian evacuation zone. The enforcer hesitated. The armsman wavered. And in that moment of doubt, Captain Cortez stepped forward, his massive form filling the corridor, his voice a rumble that echoed through the hangar. These warriors saved Imperial lives, fought chaos with honor, showed mercy when they had none. If you fire on them, you fire through me first. The standoff held for 10 seconds. Then 20. The station shuddered as the chaos bombardment continued. Alarms screamed. Evacuation warnings echoed. And slowly, reluctantly, the inquisitorial forces lowered their weapons. Not out of agreement, out of necessity. The real enemy was outside. Internal conflicts could wait. The Spartans moved deeper into the station, escorted by Cortez's Astartes, watched by hundreds of Imperial citizens who would spend the rest of their lives trying to understand what they'd witnessed. 5 warriors who fought like angels but refused to be worshipped, who killed demons but spared humans, who walked through the Imperium's darkness without being consumed by it. And the galaxy, slowly, began to realize that something new had arrived. Something it didn't have words for yet. Something that might change everything. There are stories in the Imperium that aren't written down. Legends whispered by soldiers in the trenches, by crewmen in the depths of void ships, by civilians who survive encounters with the galaxy's horrors and live to tell fragmented tales. These stories don't make it into official records. The Inquisition sees to that. But they persist anyway, passed from mouth to mouth, changing with each telling, until truth and myth become indistinguishable. The story of the five would become one of those legends. The Spartans disappeared into the Void Station's underbelly with Captain Cortez's reluctant aid. The Crimson Fists provided false transponder codes, forged identification, and a decommissioned transport that could reach the edge of the segmentum before anyone noticed. Cortez knew he'd face censure for this, possibly execution. But he'd made his choice. He'd seen what the Spartans represented, not a threat to the Imperium, but a mirror held up to its failures. A reminder that humanity could be disciplined without fanaticism, strong without cruelty, loyal without worship. Before they parted, John extended his hand. The gesture confused Cortez Astartes didn't shake hands. They clasped forearms or made the sign of the Aquila. But he accepted anyway, his massive gauntlet engulfing the Spartan's armored hand. "Where will you go?" Cortez asked. "Wherever we're needed. Wherever chaos threatens civilians who can't protect themselves. Wherever we can make a difference without being executed for it. You understand the Imperium will hunt you. The Inquisition doesn't forgive, doesn't forget. We've been hunted before, by species smarter, faster, and better equipped than anything we've seen here. We're still standing." Cortez almost smiled. "You're either the bravest warriors I've ever met, or the most foolish. Probably both." The Spartans boarded their transport and launched into the void. Behind them, the Cadian Gate burned with the fires of another chaos incursion, another desperate stand, another day in the Imperium's eternal war. But something had changed. Something small. Something the authorities would try to suppress, but couldn't fully erase. Hope. Not the blind faith the ecclesiarchy preached. Not the grim fatalism the Imperial Guard carried. But the cold, tactical hope of soldiers who refused to accept that survival was impossible. Who looked at hell and calculated how to walk through it without burning. In the months that followed, reports filtered through the segmentum. Unconfirmed sightings. Battles where unknown warriors appeared, fought alongside Imperial forces against chaos or Xenos, and vanished before interrogation. Tech priests found spent shell casings made of materials not in the Mechanicus catalogs. Guardsmen swore they'd seen armored figures moving too fast to be Astartes, too precise to be human. Inquisitors investigated, but the five were ghosts never where expected. Always gone before reinforcements arrived. They hit a chaos cult on an agri-world, dismantling its leadership in a single night without a single civilian casualty. They defended a missionary outpost against a dark Eldar raid, holding the line until Imperial Navy arrived. They infiltrated a Genestealer-infested hive city and collapsed the entire infestation from within, using tactics the Death Watch would study for years. The Imperium wanted them dead. Chaos wanted them corrupted. Xeno species began to notice them. The Eldar whispered about Mon-Ki, who walked between threads of fate. The Tau debated whether to recruit them. The Orcs just wanted to fight them for the sheer fun of it. But the Spartans didn't choose sides. They chose missions. They chose to protect the innocent, fight the corrupt, and survive in a galaxy designed to break everyone who tried to do good. They were hunted. They were legends. They were nightmares to their enemies and hope to those they saved. They were five soldiers from another universe, trying to complete a mission in a galaxy that didn't believe missions could be one only endured, somewhere in the depths of Imperial space. In a decommissioned void station that had been forgotten for centuries, the Spartans set up a temporary base. They salvaged equipment, fabricated ammunition using Forerunner-inspired techniques that made tech priests weep, and planned their next operation. Around them, the Imperium crumbled slowly, as it always had, as it always would. But in that forgotten station, 5 warriors sat in silence, cleaning weapons, reviewing mission data, and refusing to give up. John stood at an observation port, staring out at distant stars scattered across a galaxy in eternal war. His reflection in the armored glass showed a faceless helmet, cold and efficient. But behind that visor were eyes that had seen too much death and refused to become numb to it. Kelly approached, her own helmet off for once, her voice quiet. "Think we'll ever get home?" "I don't know. You always know." "Then no." "Probably not. But we'll keep looking." Keep fighting. Keep trying. That's not much of a plan, Chief. It's the only one we have. She nodded, accepting it the way Spartans accepted everything with discipline. Without complaint, without hope or despair. Just the cold calculation of what needed to be done next. The rest of the team joined them, 5 silhouettes against the window, watching a universe that didn't want them but couldn't break them. Fred spoke, his voice carrying the dry humor that had kept them sane through 30 years of war. So, we're wanted by a galactic theocracy, hunted by literal demons, and operating in a universe where the good guys are barely distinguishable from the bad guys. Sam nodded. Sounds like Tuesday. Linda didn't speak, but her sniper rifle was already disassembled on a workbench, being cleaned with the obsessive care of someone who knew her life depended on every component functioning perfectly. Her silence said everything that needed saying. John turned from the window, his voice carrying the calm authority that had led them through impossible odds for decades. New galaxy. Same mission. Protect the innocent. Fight the enemy. Survive. Adapt. Overcome. We've done it before. We'll do it again. And if the whole Imperium comes for us? Kelly asked. Then we'll do what we always do. We'll make them regret it. The words hung in the cold air of the forgotten station. Outside, the galaxy burned. The Imperium ground its citizens into dust to fuel its endless war machine. Chaos laughed and schemed. Xeno-species fought and died. And somewhere in the dark, 5 Spartans prepared for their next mission, carrying with them the last ember of a humanity that refused to surrender its ideals even when survival demanded it. They'd fought in the hell of the Calais. Human covenant war. They'd walked through the flood's nightmare. They'd endured the warp's madness. This new hell, this galaxy of eternal war, blind faith, and cosmic horror was just another battlefield. And Spartans never quit. Asterisk. A final transmission went out on encrypted channels the Imperium couldn't decode. A message sent to anyone listening who might need help, who might be worth fighting for. This is Blue Team. We are operational. If you're fighting chaos, if you're protecting innocence, if you need support, we are here. You're not alone. The message echoed through the void, a whisper against the galaxy's scream. Most never heard it. Those who did dismissed it as a hoax, a trap, or madness. But a few, a very few, heard it and felt something they hadn't felt in years. Hope. Cold, tactical, disciplined hope. The kind that didn't promise victory, but refused to accept defeat. The kind 5 Spartans carried into a galaxy that had forgotten such things were possible. And in the darkness of the 41st millennium, where there is only war, 5 warriors from another universe began writing a story the Imperium would spend centuries trying to erase and failing. Because you can kill soldiers. You can burn records. You can execute witnesses. But you can't kill an idea. And the Spartans represented an idea the Grimdark future desperately needed, even if it refused to admit it. That humanity could be better. That discipline didn't require fanaticism. That strength didn't require cruelty. That soldiers could protect without becoming monsters. The galaxy would learn, slowly, painfully, one mission at a time, and the 5 would teach it, whether it wanted the lesson or not. Asterisk.